Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started.
Welcome back to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast. Joanna is tied up in other commitments at the moment. So hello, I'm Marie, and I'll be your host for this episode. Now, offering support to colleagues is such a good way to reinforce resilience and workplace morale. But us women tend to have experiences that are exclusive to females. And so having a workplace sisterhood where your co-workers can truly empathize with your female trials and tribulations can be so rewarding. So in this episode, we're speaking to Sher-Li Torrey, a mom entrepreneur from Singapore, to discuss the workplace sisterhood and its role in supporting personal resilience. She's the wonderful brain behind Moms at Work, a career portal that supports women in finding the perfect balance between being a mom and working. Hi, Sher-Li. It's lovely having you on the show.
Hi, Marie. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. So I'm really curious to know, as a mom who runs a business, what is your ethos when it comes to personal resilience?
I'm a big believer that in order for you to build resilience, you have to know your limits, right? You have to know what you can take on. You have to know, in a way, your limits, right? What you should say no to. So I think the first step to resilience is knowing how far you can go, knowing what you have to say no to, knowing where this is it. I cannot take it anymore. My own experience has been that if I don't and I take on more than I can, whether it's at work or it's with family, I burn out, right? So I think that's a start. And interestingly, I also think it takes time. Over years, you get better at it. You start to know, where you can push yourself and where some things are just beyond you. You cannot go beyond that. So to me, resilience is knowing that, and then because of that, then building up that kind of a strength to overcome challenges.
Yeah, for sure. That's such a good way of putting it. And if you think about it, it also costs you a lot of resilience and perseverance to not be a people pleaser and to set boundaries. Yeah, it takes a lot. So that's a great introduction to our topic for today. But before we get further into detail, we'd love to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Sher-Li? And my first question for you is, what are some of your favorite pastimes?
I have a few. I always say that there was the before child and after child interest. Before children, I think I had a lot more interesting hobbies, but I stick to a couple of them. One that I really like is trekking. I take time always to go off on my own, to really wander off, climb mountains. And I'm no Mount Everest climber. It's just literally trekking up a mountain that takes me maybe 2-3 hours to get to the top, and 3 hours to come back down. But I find that very, very refreshing because it's really my alone time, and I get to clean out, literally clear out any things that are in my head on a day-to-day basis. I don't get to do it very often because I'm based in Singapore and there aren't too many mountains to climb. But I make it a point to at least a few times a year fly off to Japan and also to Hong Kong, where sometimes I go for work. And I would always make time to go into nature and do some trekking. Yeah.
Mhm. That sounds amazing. And it must be also really gratifying to reach the top and finish the trek as well, seeing the beautiful scenery.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So
But I've
where
also learned, actually, I think, aligned with resilience, a lot of times it's not about getting to the top. A lot of the beautiful moments have always been on the way, stopping to see something, some animal or some interesting bird. I
yeah.
know it sounds so cliche, but it's true that it's really the small little things you see along the way I remember one trip, and I'll share this with you. I was climbing up to the top of this, it was quite fairly remote mountain, I would say. And there was a guy in front of me, and he was, he had all these machines attached to him, and I was quite interested. So later on, I asked him, and he said he actually worked for Google Maps. So his job was to literally, he was tracking with me in a way, but he was tracking to identify, where things were. Because in Japan, even in fairly remote places, you do see, I always joke about, you see a vending machine in the middle of nowhere, right? Google Maps tracked some of this, and his job was, he had all these machines around him, and his job was to track and what was around him. So again, to my point, you don't get to see some of these things unless you stop and watch and observe, and who are the other people on the mountain with you, what are some of the animals that you see that you don't normally see. And I think that's really about life too, right? We often go and say, I only want to focus on the goal, but some of the learning in life is really on the journey. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. That's wonderfully said. So apt. And are there any spots that you like to go to for trekking?
I have a bias for northern Japan because I lived there for quite a long time when I was younger. It's very rural. It's still fairly untouched by tourism. I mean, I always joke that there's no real, touristy area there. But it's really beautiful. And I think it's still on main, Japan island. It's not on Hokkaido island. So it's a really gorgeous part of Japan. People are still very warm and friendly. They don't speak any English, obviously, but it's a beautiful, beautiful part of Japan.
That sounds amazing. How many times have you gone there for trekking?
Probably since I left Japan in 2004. So 20 over times, 30 over times, I think. Yeah.
Wow, that's so many. I have only been trekking once. So that, like, in comparison, my trekking efforts obviously pale. Uh, but how long were you living in Japan for?
I was there for about 3.5 years. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's pretty nice length.
Yes.
Yeah, so did you discover any places in Japan that you think deserve a bit more credit?
Um, I'm biased. I think every part of Japan deserves credit. So, but it's also because I live there, I work there, and I obviously have friends there. So, it is very unique, and I think in the last 5-6 years, tourism has really hit Japan, and people are just starting to discover, the less touristy parts of Japan. But I've always said this: Japan's beauty lies not in its places, it lies in its people, in its culture, in its way of life, the history. I mean, it's something that I grew to really love when I was there. Yeah.
Yeah, and did you have a favorite suburb or neighborhood to visit?
Uh, I wouldn't say a particular one because it's always been interesting for me. And because I was more in the northern part of Japan, and my husband spent a lot of time in Kansai area, Kyoto and all that. And I used to laugh at him. I say, there's nothing to do there. But after we got married, I got more curious, and I went, more often to Wakayama and small little, there are different mountains in all these different prefectures. They are very interesting. And actually, most Japanese people would tell you northern Japan, central Japan, southern Japan are all different. Hokkaido is its own thing. So from the outside, it looks very similar. But when you're quite familiar with the culture, you realize that there are little different, small things. Like, for example, Kyoto people will never talk to people in the north. They think the north people are too countryside, too inaka. So it's these small things that you get familiar with. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting how the culture is so distinct. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I feel like we got to know you a bit better about your trekking, about your love for Japan. It sounds like you've really crafted this attachment with Japan, and like well deserved as well. So now we're moving on to the interview section, and my first question for you is, what is your definition of personal resilience?
I think personal resilience is really bouncing back from situations where they probably cause you a lot of pain or a lot of difficulty. And I would say myself, because I think everybody has different thresholds of what is unpleasant to them, right? I've come to learn over the years also that when we tell someone, your resilience you should have resilience, but I realized that everyone has very different levels of resilience. So sometimes something that really affects someone. So I give an example at a workplace, right? I'm personally someone that if I hear something negative said to me, I will take it on and then process it and then get over it, right? But there will be people who say, I cannot, it stays with me for a long time and I'm haunted by it. So again, I think it's not one of those things where you can say everyone has the same threshold for feedback, the same threshold for negative comments, the same threshold for unpleasant incidents, right? So I feel that personal resilience is really whatever it is that gets to you, you find some way to get back on track and not let it get to you, right? So similarly for physical, some people health it's a huge problem and it's a real challenge, but some people bounce back fast. They don't let the sickness get to them. And others are more like, wow, it's really consumed me. I cannot take on more. So again, it's this idea that we all have our own levels and it's so important to, take note of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. And from what you were saying, it sounds like personal resilience kind of exists not on a linear spectrum, but more on a radial spectrum. There's certain things that people might be able to be more resilient for, or more persistent with, and there are other things where maybe it gets to them a bit more. So it's not about like how affected you are by it, but by how you react to the situation, I guess.
Yes. I think because we all have different backgrounds, different histories, different ways of coping, right? So I think it's, I find this very important because I find that sometimes when you tell someone tells you a problem, for example, and you think to yourself, why are you so affected by it, right? I mean, it makes no sense to me, but just because it doesn't make sense to me doesn't mean that it's a very different impact on this person because of their background, and I think that's where sometimes this idea of empathy comes in when you're encouraging someone to overcome challenges in their lives, right?
Yeah, that is such a good way of putting it. It is very inclusive, and like I totally agree with you. With regards to like everyone has different backgrounds. There's so many different factors to take into consideration, not only their backgrounds, but also just whatever they might be going through at that point in time. They might not be able to they might not have the capability at that specific point in time to deal with that event. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. The next thing I wanted to ask was, what is the workplace sisterhood? Could you tell us about it?
It's really interesting because I think when I first had that word come into my vocabulary, it took me a while to try to figure out what it meant, because when you hear about sisterhood, you hear about it, growing up in school. But it was really this idea that the workplace also has this need for people to build bonds and connections, right? And I think that's where women it's so important that they bond with each other and they find that safe space where they can connect. I would also be honest to say that not every female is so lucky. Sometimes you are in a workplace where you don't have as many female colleagues, right? That's one. And sometimes you're just in a place where people don't really connect, right? So I think when women are lucky enough to have that sisterhood, they are actually blessed. And I think in a way that bond, that connection between women is something that is so, I wouldn't say survival, but it really helps women thrive. They look out for each other. If not anything else, at least there's someone to help you, kind of like bounce off ideas. You want to talk bad about something or an unpleasant event, yeah.
yeah, sometimes you just need an outlet to vent or an outlet to, just verbalize your thoughts as well. And another thing I was wondering actually was, the workplace sisterhood is such a strong title. Yeah, would you happen to know in like reality, how does it actually manifest? How does it actually get executed? Is it as calculated as it sounds in terms of like we are creating a workplace sisterhood now? Let's like form a union, or could it be just as simple as a little group of female friends, just hanging out
That's
for
so
fun?
interesting because there's a lot of these organizations that set up women's network, and I've actually been involved in some of them, where we help them to set up. But I've always found that it's not about it's never really about having a women's network. It's always about these unspoken, very organically set up support groups. But having said that, there are also organizations where it doesn't come naturally. So if you don't have a women's network, you're never going to be able to give the mandate to say that we allow it. I think I had this huge debate with an organization one time because they said, we have to have a women's network so the women feel like they belong. And I said, it's not about the women's network. It's really the culture, right? The truth is, most people, most women will try to create their own sisterhood, their own clique, their own support system, right? When you create a women's network, what it is it's just making it very professional and saying that I'm allowing it, I'm encouraging it, right? And sometimes I joke about it. It's more to tell the men that we're here, we want to have this support system. And I think that's what it is. It's that whole nice mix of it being professionally created, but also this idea that it's organic. There has to be buy-in. I know women's network that have been set up and in the name of sisterhood, but no one attends anything. But I also know organizations where there is no women's network, there's no professional setup, but there are these little small groups of, there's an organization I knew I worked with where all the moms got together. They knew each other, they would hang out on, weekends together. So again, these were not professionally set up, but it was this way of creating that bond between women. And I think women naturally do it anyway, because women are, we like talking, we like connecting, we like feeling that we're not alone, right? And I think that's where it's important. So to answer your question, really, I think it's really this idea that looking at the environment to see whether it's something that needs to be created formally or whether organically it's already happening every single day.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a very, very detailed answer. Thank you for that. And what do you think what role do you think social support plays in the workplace? Especially when with regards to like the women's the workplace sisterhood and personal resilience.
I think it's essential because we spend so much time at work. If you don't have any form of a social support, if you don't have any form of a sense of belonging, and to me, maybe I'll take this back a little bit. If you think about it, social support is allowing you, something that's created to allow you to feel like you belong somewhere. It allows you to almost go into that space of knowing that you can be who you are, right? So I mentioned just now the moms getting together. Why is that so useful and so pertinent in a workplace? It's because it's nice to know that there's another working mom like you going through the same challenges. And that is the social support that, we talk about. It can be the same for men too, but the truth is, for women, we cherish it more, right? I knew this organization, for example, where women above 50, they found each other, right? And they said we would be the 50th group in the organization. But again, there was something in common. And it was them going out there to say that we have this in common. We are encouraging each other to be their whole selves at work, right? And I think that is so important because when someone feels like they can be who they are at work as much as possible, it becomes a form of resilience. It helps them to feel like they're supported. It helps them to feel like they're going to be okay, whatever comes at them, they have someone or something to rely on. They are someone who recognizes them for who they are and what they bring to the table. So I think really, if you think about it, social support in a bigger sense, it's really about having that group of people to help you feel like you belong in a place and you can be who you want to be at that place.
Yeah, I never actually thought about it that way. But that was a really good way of putting it too. And it also sounds like that social support helps to ground someone, helps to remind them that they don't have to be alone in this, and whatever they're going through, that there's someone out there for them, and that really helps to not feel like everything's falling apart at work, especially if you don't feel like you're keeping up with your tasks as you should be. At least you have someone there to kind of show you that moral support. And sometimes that might not be reciprocated from your boss, but that's not expected. So at least you have someone else there who can whisper kind things in your ear, or even just show up for you physically, whichever way you
Yeah,
receive
I think
that.
human beings, when we know we're not alone,
Yeah.
it really it takes away half that fear, the pain, the sense of that the whole world's against me, right? I think that's why having social support in that sense, whoever you are, whatever your background, is actually quite important for a person to feel like they can manage.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And so, in your experience, what are some ways to cultivate that supportive environment amongst colleagues? S- I know you mentioned previously about how some workplaces have that organically, some feel like they need to set it up. So how do we assess when it needs to be set up?
I think when I've seen the organizations and they come to us and ask us for advice, they set it up when they realize that the group they're trying to offer this social support to is very quiet, and they feel like their voices are not heard. Right. So I mentioned earlier on, in very male dominated industries, for example, they feel a very strong need to set up a women's network because they realize that if they don't do that, um, maybe the women feel that their voices are not heard. Maybe they feel that they are alone. Maybe they feel that it's everybody against me. So I think that's when you know that needs to be formalized, just so that it's almost like a green light to say, go ahead, find your people, find your tribe, find your tribe, and make sure that you're comfortable with them. And I think sometimes that's why organizations say, let me do it in a very formal manner. But with that said, again, to my point, if there are also cases where it's organically set up because individuals feel like, I'm alone, I don't want to be alone, I want my voice heard. That's when they come together and create that social support network for themselves, right? So I think it's interesting because either way, it's really human beings calling out to say that I want my voice heard.
Mhm. And so, from what you've seen, what are some of the first steps to creating that workplace sisterhood?
You have to find the people. You can't be alone.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't have a sisterhood by yourself.
Mhm.
I think that's one thing. Second thing is really recognizing that you have to find the people, find what's the commonality between each other, with each other, and then creating something. And I find sometimes these networks are created because they want to do something together, right? There's a common goal, there's a common endpoint that they're going for. So, like I said, they want their voices heard. They want to create a platform where people can come forward and give out, share ideas or maybe give suggestions. So I think that's when it's what I call a network that is working, right? When a network doesn't work, and I've seen this before as well, where they set it up and it kind of falls behind because people don't really feel they need to have their voices heard. And I think sometimes also these sisterhood kind of when there's a voice, you are also giving people a chance to understand, for lack of better words, the stereotypes of your group. So I give an example. When moms, working moms from a network, say in an organization, and they bond together, a lot of times they recognize that they represent this group. So there may be colleagues or managers or supervisors who don't understand the challenges working moms go through. And it's a fair thing. So maybe the individuals within this network then speak up more often for it and say, just to let you know, so and so is pregnant. She's going to be a mom in a couple of months. You might see her go through this. So it's allowing and helping others around them, the other stakeholders, really develop a sense of empathy for a group that, for women in this case, right, that maybe feel like nobody else understands what I go through.
Yeah. And it's also like if someone apart from you raises a concern that you also have, it kind of raises that attention, to the manager, that this is a concern that isn't affecting just one person, but other people as well. It's kind of solidifies the need
Yes.
to give attention
Correct. I think that's a very good point, because really sometimes you think it's just one person, but if you start to realize it's a whole team, it's a whole like 5-6 people, then okay, we better start paying attention, right? So I think that's the beauty of this idea that when you are creating this whether you call it sisterhood, whether you call it network, it's really finding that voice again, and the voice gets amplified because there are more of you.
Yeah. And so are there any challenges when it comes to setting up workplace sisterhoods or maintaining them?
I think starting up has never really been the issue. It's always been maintaining. I think sometimes they start off with the common goal, or they start off with this idea that we have even a common challenge, right? And then once the challenge gets resolved or the goal is achieved, sometimes people kind of fall off and say, well, maybe we don't need it anymore. But I haven't really seen that to be too much of a problem. It's only when people get inactive and they start to think about it as it's just another extracurricular activity. I don't really get anything out of it. So I often tell people when they set up these networks, I say it has to add value. Do things that add value. Have activities that add value, so that the women that come from it feel that it's something that is worth my time. It's something that is worth my effort. I'm also, putting out my hand to say that I'm part of this group. So I want to be, in a way, recognized, and I want to feel like my time and effort is not wasted.
Yeah, that's a good idea. What kind of activities have you seen?
All kinds. I mean, there are some very formal ones, like, having talks or getting together to invite someone to come down and speak and be inspired. But there are also informal gatherings where they just get together. And I remember there was an organization, I can't share who they are, but it was funny. They said they had a complain all you want Wednesday, right? And they all get together over lunch, and they'll just be like, oh, we'll just bring. But these things, they are so, they sound so funny, but at the same time, they are so needed.
Yeah, 100%. Like if you stand from a distance, you'll kind of laugh at it and giggle a little bit, like, oh my god, that's so funny. That's such a Singaporean thing to do as well. Complain all that you want. But this just helps people feel like they are being heard, and helps also to it's a bonding experience, definitely. So with this, sorry, I'm just gonna reset there.
Sure.
I'm just gonna take a drink. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. So with this, it sounds like there's a lot of vulnerability and openness that is required as well, with venting about things in the workplace, or sharing personal experiences and challenges within the workplace sisterhood. Are there any potential risks that come with this?
I think you really hit the nail on the head. I think when you bond with people, you're always going to be more open and vulnerable, right? And I think with that, it always feels like it's an emotional risk because you trust someone. So even like I said earlier on, complain all you want Wednesday, but if that was not held as a sacred time and place for you to be honest and open, and people mistrust, they break that trust and they share whatever you said to someone else, for example. I think that's when, it doesn't work. So I think that vulnerability is something which is needed. And frankly, the most successful sisterhoods, the most successful networks, whether they be professional or personal, they come from a place of trust, right? I think when people in the same group feel like they can trust each other, they feel like they have each other's back, I think that's when it's a successful support. But there are, of course, times where people don't, they don't upkeep their part in it. And that's when it falls apart as well.
Yeah. And so how would that situation usually be handled when someone doesn't really upkeep their part in it?
Yeah, I think it's a hard one to answer because, again, if I look at it from a personal point of view, then obviously each of us have our own ways of handling it. Some will just disconnect, right? Then others will find a different way to interact with the individual. On a professional front, usually you can see some disconnect as well. I've seen it. And again, it questions the purpose of the network. It questions the purpose of the sisterhood. But ultimately, as human beings, that's how we are. We trust each other and therefore we form bonds, right? And so the answer to that probably is when someone breaks the bond, what would you do naturally to curb it, to prevent it? So usually it means either cut off or finding a different network to create. I knew of an organization that was a network creator. It didn't work out. Someone created a sub-network within the network. So you do have things like that, yeah.
There's sub-networks.
Yeah, okay. But if you think about it, when we're in school, that was how it was too, right? There's a huge clique of friends. And then someone has a debate with someone else and a sub-clique comes up. So sometimes I joke about it. We've never really left high school in a way, right?
Yeah.
So
and so does intersectionality come into play in this workplace sisterhood as well? I imagine that's, with workplace sisterhoods, it's very general. All women are welcome, right? But some people might have common, more niche goals than the larger group.
Yes, definitely. So I'm going to be very frank here. I find that it is one of my biggest pet peeves about women generalizing is that I think not all women are the same, right? We are all affected by life stages, and actually for women we are affected by life stages more than men. How so? Because if you think about life stages, that means literally not everybody goes through it, but the more conventional life stage would be you get married and then you have kids and the kids grow up and then you become the caregiver for your parents, for example. And everything that I've mentioned has a stage, right? And if you think about it, women, partly because of the fact that they are the nurturers in most families, and not always the case, but quite largely the case, right? They then take on the caregiving role, and that affects that life stage and affects them. And I think when you put this in the workplace, you then see sometimes there's a difference between a working mom and a working female, but who's not a mom. And you do hear stories like, why is it she gets this off day? I don't get off day. Why did she get promoted? And things like that. So actually what I've learned over the years with this is that even within the sisterhood, there's going to be little mini subgroups of sisterhood. But what it is really, women are trying to find the person that has something in common with them. And when women, I think this would happen to men too, but I can speak for women because I see more cases when they go through a huge life stage change, something changes. And then they realize, okay, we don't really say the same thing. Our needs are not the same. I will have to find someone that's a bit more similar. And actually, sometimes this happens in real life too. I have plenty of female friends who, over the years, they would tell me, well, I got married and all my good friends were not married yet. So after a while, we kind of drifted apart. Or more significantly is I got married and had kids. And my poor friends who have no kids, they come along and they just sit with me through dinner and look so miserable. And after a while, I feel so bad. We start to distance, right? So, and it's almost like you can see it's a little bit of that same thing where because of the life stage change, everything is different, right? I mean, you as a young new mom, for example, you can't go clubbing as much as you want to, right? So again, these things change, and because they change, you start seeking out or maybe moving away from a particular sisterhood that you were familiar with. And it's not from lack of wanting, but really it's caused that challenge and that change. I do believe men have it too, but I'm not so familiar. But women, I really see that significantly. So you see this even in the workplace. The working moms will find each other. The working women who are not with no kids will find each other, and so on and so forth. And I would like to say that there is a common thing among them, but again, they're finding that common pain point, the common challenges, and in a way, you get me. Therefore, I want to click with you. I think that makes sense, right?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And it's also kind of about like, just aside from challenges, there's always going to be like kind
When
of
you even try it.
internal like dilemmas.
Yes.
With what school to send your children to, whether to send them to a neighborhood school,
anything,
nearby,
or even your career, because you start thinking, should I take on a part-time role instead of a full-time role, right? The truth is, if you speak to someone who's not a mom yet, she may be like, well, I don't know what you're going through, but I guess you should. But someone who goes through the same pain will understand it feels like a dilemma, because you, on the one hand, you want to spend time with the kids, but on the other hand, you also want to build your career, right? And that kind of a pull, I mean, to be honest, until you go through it, you can never fully 100% empathize. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, for sure. I know myself that, there's certain dilemmas that my mom has to think about that, like, I can empathize to a certain extent, but I'll always think of myself as more objective, not in the sense of like, this is a better way to think about it. But because I have more distance from this, I have less attachment to this, I don't have to struggle with the dilemma as much. So that's something that's moms have in common and can support each other with. That the same goes for other groups.
Yeah,
That
for sure. Yeah.
Just not with the struggle of which school to send their
Yeah,
children to,
I mean,
but
you
with
don't have
other
the added
struggles.
advantage, but I know for a fact, like I have plenty of friends who have no children. They have their own concerns. So they tell me, I worry that I don't have children, and therefore I've given myself 10 years in my career and I haven't got to where I want to get to, and then they talk. But as a mom, I almost feel like I can't fully empathize, because I got that 10 years, but I was also trying to figure out how to, like you said, where do my kids go, right? So it's again finding that person or that group that you feel, really gets me, without me having to explain too much, right? And I think that's why sisterhood, even though it's this big term, there's always going to be little subgroups, no matter how. Maybe women are just more like that. We like to subdivide more. I don't know.
Yeah, and doesn't sound like it's necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not.
Yeah, because at the very least, you have people who can truly understand you, and it's not about alienating anyone at all. It's more about like being able to confide in someone who can truly understand what your concerns are. So it sounds like a good. It sounds like, if anything, it's a good thing. My last question for you, because we have gone into this in quite a lot of detail and it's been such an eye opener for me, but I'm really curious to know, are there any misconceptions about workplace sisterhoods?
Yes, that sometimes I've heard that, not from me, but I've heard that, sometimes it's created to push back against men, which I feel it's not always true. I think, again, to my point, it's created because it offers comfort. It offers a sense of belonging. The other thing is also sometimes you hear that it's the myth is that it causes more harm than benefits, because it creates these little subgroups like what we mentioned earlier. But again, I feel it's just part of human beings. We always gravitate towards what makes us feel safe, and I think that's why no matter what they say about sisterhood, I think it's needed. And you just gotta find your tribe, right? I think once you have that, you feel like you belong in this place. But there are many people I know, they work at places where they don't have it and they say, well, I still survive. It's true. I think they still thrive. But I believe there's a lot of joy that you get out of finding your own, group of sisters to hang out with. And I think, to my earliest point, I think I said something to the effect like, if you have it, you're lucky.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I feel like it was such a detailed interview, and I learned so much from you. It was truly eye-opening learning about the workplace sisterhood, how it works. I didn't really have that much of an idea of what a workplace sisterhood was, but now I do. Yeah, and so now moving on to the practices and habits section. My first question for you is, what habits would you suggest practicing to reinforce social support for women in the workplace?
I think first thing is to have empathy. Everybody needs to have that because if you want to understand women, you have to understand what they go through. If you want to understand working moms, trying to have some empathy and realizing that what they're going through may not be something you're familiar with. So empathy is the first one. Second thing is really asking questions. I think sometimes people assume before they, so I feel there are times where because someone is a mom, you assume that they don't want to be promoted. I've heard that before as well. So I think that's quite important. And thirdly is really being very open in communicating that your support. Because a lot of times I think for women generally in most workplaces feel like they have to keep quiet. They can be vocal, but you would see quite a large number would shy away from it, especially in Singapore, even though I think women here are quite, we have a lot of opinions and all that, but you still see this in the workplace where, you know what I mean? Like the manager will say, does anyone have anything that bothers them? Anyone wants to highlight? Most females will keep quiet about it and figure out, they think, I try to figure it out before I bring up the challenge, right? Which I think is why whoever you are, whether you're male or female, the practice is really saying that, being empathetic, trying to listen, trying to understand, and then really being open to say that I do want to hear your opinions. I do want to support you. Just because you have that idea or thought, if it's not communicated, the females won't know that.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like a lot of people that probably extends and holds true for other people as well, because we don't want to be presumptuous about someone being able to empathize with us. We don't want to be presumptuous in most cases, so we wouldn't go so far as to make that statement in our head. So having that clarified and having that communicated is so important. Yeah. So are there any challenges though in doing this practice?
Yes, I think so. Because if you think about it, this takes time and takes effort. It's a little bit of going out of the way, right? Most people would say, well, I'm just there to work. I am just there to do my job, right? I've learned over the years, maybe not for all groups, but for managers, for example, when we're talking to them, a lot of times we say, it's a bit more effort on your part, but you'll be surprised by putting in that effort, the rewards of that, the communication, the success, and the person's commitment to the team and the bond with the team is huge, right? So I think when we want to make the workplace one that is really beneficial, where women feel like, I'm happy to be here, I think it's important that you don't shy away from being transparent about what you want to do. And I think sometimes, when we bring up to men say, oh, how can we be more supportive of women? You guys never tell us. But then the thing becomes, you never asked us.
Never ask.
Yeah. So don't presume that just because, don't presume and assume that because it's not mentioned that it's not a problem or a challenge. I think communication is so key, and because it takes a bit more effort, some people will just either shy away from it or they say, well, it's not what I'm paid to do, right? But I think this is, in the long run, it's what causes a lot of problems, a lot of misunderstandings, and eventually leads to someone feeling like, I don't have a place here, I don't belong, you're not a good colleague, you're not a good teammate. But it could have all been stopped if from the beginning that was brought up. So the challenge here is always that there's too much assuming, there's too much, I don't want to do it because it's a bit more work on my back. But a bit more work makes a world of difference sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also kind of like making that initial step to ensure that the other person knows that it's a safe space, because no one likes to again be presumptuous about what kind of space they're in, whether it's safe or not safe. We'd rather just kind of um, go with what has already been done, go with the status quo because that's the way it's always been. But if it's been made known that it is a safe space to voice our concerns, that's when we're like, oh, okay, I am able to bring this up. I am welcome to bring this up, and in and of itself, it sounds like it also takes a bit of courage, to start being the first one to rise up to the status quo. But it doesn't have to feel that way, in the sense of like you don't have to feel like you are being the resistance, but you can kind of start from that perspective of like, I'm just making sure that my colleagues know that this is a space where they can bring up these concerns. And in viewing it that way, it kind of like takes you out of that, it's like, oh, I'm fighting against something. Yeah, it makes it feel a bit more approachable, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes people don't give ourselves credit enough for talking. Sometimes
Mm.
people feel that if I don't say it, it will disappear. If I don't say it, it's okay. But it doesn't work like that. I think too many times I've seen the challenges of the workplace, whether it be on a social level, professional level, psychological level, it's because something that should have been brought up was not brought up.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. It was a really, really good chat. Now moving on to the open mic section. This is your chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about. It doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
Okay, so in addition to all the support that I love to give to mothers and all that, another huge thing that I really love is well, I wouldn't say I love, but it's what I feel passionate about. So you know how Forbes has 30 under 30. I remember reading all these wonderful lists, and obviously I was way past 30 by then. And I thought to myself, why can't we recognize women who are above 40? Because a lot of times after 40 is when a lot of women in particular, they get to change a career, after taking care of their kids or even their parents or what have you. They decide that I want to do something different, but they're not recognized for their effort, right? So I created something called Singapore 40 over 40. We've done it for 2 runs now, where we recognize 40 women after the age of 40 years old who started a business, started a nonprofit, changed a huge career path, or did something amazing, right? And it's something that I feel is so needed in Asia in particular, because I think in all other parts of the world, 50 is where things start to look a little bit more gray and unpleasant. But in Asia, 40 starts to kick in, and people will actually casually mention if you're too old to learn something new. So I feel very strongly against that. And I feel that, age is really a number, because I feel there are a lot of people that after a certain age, there's wisdom, right? And you learn from the setbacks, you learn from the things that you kind of know where your energy goes. So even to my earlier point about how you bring up things, right? You after 40, honestly, you don't think about it. You say, it's going to bite me back later on. I'm going to bring it up now. I'm not going to waste my time and keep quiet about it, right? But these are such amazing little things that you've learned. And after a certain age, you decide, it's good for me. I can use it now to my advantage. So if more can be done to encourage people to not let age be a factor that holds them back from what they want to do and try. I mean, I know there are physical limitations sometimes, but by and large, a lot of it's in the head too, right? If you tell yourself that I'm going to try, so even if you don't, you don't achieve 100% of what you want to do, you've done 70%. And then I think if you don't let age be that limit for yourself, there's so much potential. Yeah. So I hope anyone who's listening in will really think about this and remember that, age is not something that should hold you back. It should never, whether you're too young or too old, there's no such a thing as too. It's always just who you are. It's what you do. It's what you've chosen to do at the stage of your life, and you are ready, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like you reach for the moon and you still land among the stars. And like, yeah, what's wrong with landing among the stars?
When you're
Even if you
older,
can't
right?
reach
So
the
I always
yeah.
like, it doesn't matter if you're 50, you wanna
Yeah.
go on. So I remember even in the list there was a lady in her, I think, 70s, and she was modeling. She started modeling, and then there were a couple of ladies in their 60s who started these amazing non-profits to give back to charity. And they were scared because, they told me, I'm so afraid, I'm older now. And, when I knock on doors, people aren't always as friendly. And in a way, I'm judged more. But the funniest thing is also because they're older, they say, actually, you know what? I don't care if people judge me. I know what I want to do. I want to do good. And this is it. So again, to my point, if society was kinder to people, regardless of their age, I think all of us would benefit from it.
Yeah, that is such a great initiative that I feel like really comes from your heart, and I love seeing that in people. Where can we find these lists of Singapore's
Yeah,
40 over 40?
it's found on Singapore40over40.com.
Yeah, that's great. And if our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I am discoverable as Sher-Li Torrey. But you can also go to momsatwork.net.
All right, that's amazing. Thank you so much once again, Sher-Li. I feel like this was such an insightful and delightful conversation. I really appreciated everything that you shared with me. It was really inspiring as well. And thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you learned something about personal resilience and the workplace sisterhoods. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, pr.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.